Good evening, fellow model builders. Welcome to YouTube Model Builders Hangouts. This is the Barry and Mike Model Railroad Tech Show, our live hangout presentation. Our guest stars are Andy Crawford of the N&W and Chris Healy and Mike Denninger and myself. So I hope everyone's prepared to come along and learn a little bit about some JMRI connection topics and different, control buses and stuff used with DCC and how they relate to JMRI. So let me go on to the next slide. Come on. There we go. There we go. Just froze there for a second. So don't forget that YouTube Model Builders is your source for free model railroad resources. We have our free online e-magazine, which was just published. It's the beginning of its second year already, and it was just published over the weekend. Then we have our Tuesday, Thursday night live chat presentation hangouts, and once a month, last Saturday, was also the live show. So don't forget to join us on the live show every month. And everything you wanted to know about us is on www.youtubemodelbuilders.com. Go there, you can find all of our event schedules as we post them. You can download the eMag. You can subscribe to get notified when the eMag is coming out, and it'll get a link emailed to you. And eventually we'll be using that for some other marketing purposes to tell you about different events we're doing and such. So go on there and go to the eMag tab in the right and subscribe. Alrighty. So tonight we are going to do a little discussion on JMRI, but we're going to be focusing on the different type of bus connections and such as you would use with your layout and your DCC system and how they relate to JMRI. So a few things to show you in the connections panel and such, how you can set up multiple connections, why you would set up multiple connections, etc. So tonight we have, like I said, we have our famous guy Andy Crawford here from the N&W, and then we have Mr. Chris Healy, and we have my boy Mike Denninger there. So tonight we'll be discussing all of that. So we got a few comments already. We've got Billy Gorman, and then we got Sean Hendricks and Dwight Chrisman, all the way from the cold upper Midwest, rather. Yeah, we're gonna be joining you from Friday, man. They're calling around Philly for 1 to 2 feet of snow. So
2 feet, yeah, boy.
Yeah, and then one thing, Sean, now we're only gonna get like a wintry mix in Jersey. That's too close for my call. That means we're going to get the ones with the foot.
Yeah.
So, the first part of the topic we will discuss concerning the different kinds of buses on your layout, how they relate to JMRI, and what they are, and why you do or do not need them. So, first thing I'll start off is obviously each DCC system has its own unique control bus. It's usually called the throttle bus. That's where your throttles plug in. That's where your accessories, such like say Digitrax, like a PR3 or a throttle or BDL 168, all plug into that bus. Digitrax calls it LocoNet. I believe on NCE it's the cab bus, right, Chris? He's muted.
Yep, that would be right. Just
okay,
the cab bus.
I was going to say, I didn't think that question was too hard. He just was on.
Sprague really doesn't have a bus. You just have, the only way you can do it is either to emulate Digitrax bus, which we'll talk about. There's some benefits to, but a lot of people just put everything on the track bus.
Yes, which that's the other one you can do. That's the universal way of connecting everything is through your track bus.
But there's a lot of pitfalls, and we'll explain those.
Yeah, Andy's very right. There is definitely a lot of pitfalls to using the track bus because that's the main highway for all your DCC signals to flow through to your locomotives. So, you don't want that too congested. And that's part of what the new LCC movement is all about, is to get all that stuff off the track bus and leave that for what it was designed for, controlling your locomotives. So,
And
then we have
everything on there. I would love everything to just run on 2 wires everywhere in an ideal world, but it has, and that was the original design of DCC. Everything would be on those 2 wires, locomotion and then the accessory decoders. But we started finding all kinds of serious pitfalls with it. I mean, even in the way of locomotion, there's a serious pitfall with the 2-wire bus system in that it's very difficult to have a bidirectional communication, and that's true of locomotion, accessory, etc. 2 wires are simple. Send a signal out, hope that the other side responds as expected.
Yeah, that's true, and that's been part of the problem that led to the Open LCB and MRA NIT, which has now become the LCC standard. There's not a lot of hardware implemented with it yet, but it's coming. So that's something that definitely we will be talking about that once it's more fleshed out and we have things to actually discuss. You know, show hardware and such. So see what I find in Amherst next week.
Yeah, Amherst is going to be a real good opportunity for us to get a hold of some of the people and pin them down. You know, we were discussing yesterday. There's not too much about the LCC bus on there other than it's going to be great, it's going to be wonderful. But when you go to the nuts and bolts and try to get in the weeds, it's like it's kind of it needs some work. It needs to be fleshed out, needs some more documentation and such. So.
It's really just a protocol at this point. They're waiting for manufacturers to start developing things using that protocol, I guess, is what it boils down to.
Well, unless you're willing to take Arduinos or other custom electronics and hard code the software in there to do it, there's a certain group of people that's applicable for. But for most of us who are trying to build layouts and not be amateur electronics enthusiasts, we need more from LCC. And I'm by myself, I'm holding off on some parts of my layout because of LCC. It's really incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I cannot wait to see what might show its head at Amherst, because we've had since the summer at the National Train Show when it was officially announced that the standard is ratified by the NMRA. So hopefully we will begin to see some fruition of that. You know, it may not be much. I'm not holding out a lot of hope, but I do intend to go see if I can take Ken Cameron's clinic about it, because I mean, before he discussed Open LCB a couple years back, and I sat down with him and talked about it. But this year he's doing an LCC, so hopefully it'll be that and how it integrates with JMRI.
And I think the big thing you're going to see out of LCC is a bunch of new manufacturers, would be my guess. A lot of startups, because the entrenched businesses, you know, they like to keep their stuff proprietary. The last thing they want you doing is using their Digitrax throttle on your NCE system. They want you buying an NCE throttle.
Exactly.
That's the kind of things that LCC is going to enable. So you're going to see the guys that have nothing to lose jump in there and start whole new companies and start putting out products without that proprietary mindset.
Yeah, Cottage Industries, Tam Valley, Barrett Enterprises, those kind of companies I really expect a lot from. But the reality, Digitrax has put a lot of money, and we're going to talk about that, but Digitrax has put a lot of money into their proprietary signaling system, and it's good. And it's really good considering that they invented it all themselves without an entire industry to create LCC for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Andy.
Those are the third-party companies like that are the ones you're going to see jumping into it first, and they're going to force the bigs to go along kicking and screaming eventually.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Chris, too, because a lot of the big companies, all they're focused on is making money, and you know, this is an unproven technology right now. So, I mean, to invest in hardware and LCC at this point is a real crapshoot. And you know, you take your Digitrax, your NCEs and such, they don't want to invest in the boards and the tooling and the you know, specialized chips and whatever that's required to make this work until they have to, until it's more mature.
Well, one big benefit about LCC, it is a re-engineering of CAN bus, which is the automation and protocol for automotive and engineering facilities and building control systems, CAN bus has been around for a couple decades, and all they're doing is adapting CAN bus for the purpose of model railroading. So there's all kinds of engineers who have experience with it. They just have to adapt it to our specific needs. So it's not from scratch, and that's something that I don't think has been well iterated. Everybody's scared of it because it's completely new. It's really not. It's a rebranding and a specification for how to use something that's been around for 2 decades and is well proven, specifically for your model railroad.
Well, that's the advantage of it. It is based on a proven technology. So there's a couple of comments here. We have, oh God, Sean. gotta love Sean. So Professor Kleiser, our favorite professor here. He says, will LCC allow wireless interfaces? That's a good question because I don't know if the LCC is designed for the wireless interface to your command station, but I don't see why it couldn't. Because
CAN bus in theory supports wireless. Actually, CAN bus doesn't care how the signal is transpired. You can send it over Cat5. You can send it over a couple electrical wires. You can send it over a power line wirelessly. There's all kinds of infrared. There's all kinds of theories. The communications protocol is ambiguous about the transportation mechanism, whether that's wire or wireless or not. However, I do not expect wireless accessory decoders, etc., in the early days. It's all going to be 2-wire systems.
Yeah, I think eventually that may come, but wireless throttles. Now, here's an opportunity if someone developed a wireless interface that can plug into the LCC network, and then a throttle could talk to it. They could develop their own throttle that is agnostic to anybody's DCC system and give it whatever features they want. So there is definitely a possibility that someone could do that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't see them developing a wireless module that would let a Digitrax or an NCE wireless throttle talk to it because it already exists. You wouldn't really need that, you know. Why reinvent that wheel? So
right, exactly. It's like reinventing the wheel. We got JMRI, and we could hook up Y throttle, and that's wireless, and use your cell phone. So it seems like if they have a hardware solution, it's reinventing the wheel.
But a new throttle wouldn't be.
Well, I mean, a lot of people like that tactile feel of an actual button instead of pushing their phone, and I get that. And if that's what the end result is, then something like that would sell. But it comes down to a lot of people want it until they have until it comes time to open the wallet.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because for me it's all about I can run my throttle one-handed with the actual throttle, where I need 2 hands for the phone.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris.
I don't even have to look at it. So.
Yeah, that's true. You really don't. I mean, I buy UT4s, and they're nice and easy to use. Let's see.
Yeah, the professor brings up the same point too. You don't have that tactile feedback from the phone.
Yeah, I just saw that. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. LCC Universal Interface may open that door. He's right. That would be great because, like, I just got this. It's a Galaxy S5. It uses vibration to give you a little tactile feedback on the keypad. There's no reason that an app that would talk to an LCC wireless interface couldn't do the same thing. That may be phone dependent, but a physical throttle that talks wireless, be it Wi-Fi or whatever, or Bluetooth. See, there you go. There's a perfect use for Bluetooth. To have that throttle talk to a wireless module that plugs into the LCC Universal Bus.
Or even like an infrared that takes your game controller.
Yeah, don't be going to the game controllers. Don't be going to game controllers. Okay.
That's how they fly the drones, man. I train with them too. Everything's
You're right.
Game controller.
So let's talk about buses. So, like I said, we all know what the bus that the throttles plug into. We all know what the track bus is. But the bus where the throttle plugs into is unique to every DCC system. The track bus is universal. That is your NMRI DCC standard. What gets sent over that bus is standard. But how Digitrax talks to a UT4 or a DT402 is proprietary. Same with talking to a Cab 06 on NCE. It's a proprietary hardware and software. So, what other buses are there? Well, you can use those same buses to control different, like accessory decoders. Like you can have one LocoNet bus that controls your accessory decoders and a separate one for your throttle. You can do that by tying different computer interfaces together. Same way that if I want to use an accessory bus, say with NCE, but I like all the Digitrax accessories. Well, I can't control them without LocoNet. So I make a standalone LocoNet. And that's how you get into signaling systems too. I mean, other ones, very few have their own proprietary bus. Digitrax does, as far as LocoNet being their common bus, but it also allows you to plug that into other systems via JMRI. I can't build a signal system using all Digitrax components and use an NCE command station without JMRI per se. There are some piece of hardware that will run on LocoNet that don't need a command station, but if you want to control them from a central point, you need JMRI in the computer. So what you can do is buy multiple computer interfaces, and as long as they're on separate COM ports on your computer, which is how JMRI identifies them, you can have multiples at one time. A common example, Chris is aware of, NCE doesn't really have a signaling system. They have block detection, they have switch control, but they don't have signaling. I mean, it's been in the works for a while. Don't know when that vaporware is going to appear, but what people do is they can create a standalone LocoNet using either a Digitrax PR3 or a, RR Circuits loco buffer USB, and you create your own separate bus that's LocoNet that you can now plug LocoNet accessories into, and you can tie it all together through JMRI. Now you can't throw a switch on that bus from your NCE throttle, but you could throw the switch from JMRI on a control panel or through the turnout table. So it depends upon what your needs are, and that's why I mentioned whether you should or shouldn't, have multiple buses of different types. Now, the typical thing with NCE users, if you want signal, like I said, is you use LocoNet. And most of the third-party signaling systems are dependent upon LocoNet. This, I see, is where the LCC universal bus could give manufacturers a growth path away from Digitrax. Not that Digitrax is bad. Like Andy said, their signaling system is pretty robust. It's been adopted by a lot of people. There's a lot of third-party hardware that work with it. But LCC could change that. It could allow RR circuits to say, okay, I'm gonna make a block detection, signal control boards, and such that work on the LCC bus, and that way anybody with a computer in JMRI or any throttle system can now operate that. You wouldn't even probably need a computer. I could use an NCE throttle to send a switch command. The LCC box would communicate that to the LCC bus and throw that switch. So now you're independent of your DCC system, and you probably won't even need a computer to do it. Though, if you're using JMRI for dispatch, panel control, and everything, you would need that capability. So let's see what Professor Clives, he always has some interesting comments here.
Yes, he does, Barry. Yes, he does.
I'm trying to get an IO-IO interface unit to work with engine driver on a droid to develop a hardware tactile throttle handset. The hardware is all okay, but having to learn to code Android is kicking my butt. instead of trying to drive a train with a PlayStation throttle, why not put the effort into getting a prototypical remote throttle unit to work? Oh yes, I've seen some of these guys. They actually have built like diesel control stands that
Mhm.
work, and they use like Andy would know, like use like an Arduino to build a DCC throttle.
Yeah. I,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about building. It's really not that hard to interface with the control bus, and I've been kind of holding out because LCC does have a locomotion mechanism to abstract locomotion control, and I've been thinking for a while about basically taking a nice project box and kind of building a steam locomotive backhead and
cool.
kind of simulating some of those effects. And there are some capabilities out there where you can, apply steam pressure, apply water, etc., and then have the actual generation of how much speed gets applied based on some set of math that is done within Arduino, and that shouldn't be too hard. I looked at the links that Professor Kleisler has posted, and the prof's right, and I've seen those actually in practice. I used to work for a coal sampling company, and sometimes I'd take a ride with the guys who were going out to actually sample it because, like any self-respecting rail fan, I'm not going to go check it out. And they would remote control some SW units and some old Jeeps and use those
Oh.
belly packs.
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you're modeling a modern prototype, especially a modern coal operating prototype or a piggy yard or a pig yard or something like that, those locomotives are remotely controlled by those packs. So that would be prototypical. I'm leaning more toward trying to emulate the control stand of a diesel or the backhead of a steam bulkhead of a steam locomotive.
Which can be done.
Yeah, and there's a guy out there. If you go, I need to go find the link and post it probably. But there's a fella who has he didn't go take an F unit apart and hook an Arduino to it. He's actually scratch built the control stand and all the system from an F unit, and he has monitors in front in the windows of the F unit and a camera on the front of a locomotive, and he can do everything driving the locomotive on his HO scale railroad from a prototypical scaled down. It's like 90% of the prototype or something like that. F unit control stand. That's incredible, but that has become his hobby instead of model railroading. And it's a rabbit hole. How far you go down the rabbit hole stops model railroading from being your hobby and electronics from being your hobby. And I like a good balance.
You have to draw that balance. And one thing I saw that was really interesting too, talking about steam locomotive backhead. This guy hooked up a scale, and his Arduino calculated steam pressure based on firing the locomotive. He had like a little auger which basically would move coal back and forth. You had to shovel it from the bunker into the boiler.
Yeah.
And then into the firebox, and it would roll through, and you would have to keep on firing the locomotive to keep it going, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you can do like that.
Well, there's some guys there's been a whole lot of development in the model railroad and railroads simulation space, computer simulation space lately. I mean, to the point that I'm sure a lot of young guys are not building railroads right now because they're playing with simulators and putting a lot of that on YouTube. And I still like a real physical model railroad, of course. That's what we do.
Yeah.
But I would like the idea of taking some of the innovation in that space and applying it to our model railroad. And I do think that LCC is going to allow the abstraction of computer control to not be so doggone difficult, because JMRI is impressive. That's why we're doing shows on it, why all of us love it so much. But doggone, it's difficult.
Oh yeah, it's definitely difficult.
Well,
I mean,
I think too, before we leave this topic too, I guess part of the reason why I said the game controller too is because you can leverage an investment that most people have at hand. I mean, that's why JMRI makes sense, because everybody has a computer they can hook up to the model railroad. Y throttle makes sense because everyone has a cell phone. If you can leverage the investment that people have in their house, you can really make model railroading more accessible to other people.
That's a good point, Mike. That's something I'm surprised someone hasn't already done that. Because think about it, you could use the control sticks, or let's say on PS2, the front two buttons to do notch up, notch down, I mean, actually, you know what? You can get a USB to, say, a PS2 controller or a PS3 controller that will plug it into a normal computer. They have a breakout board that you can buy that lets you say the output from this button on the throttle goes to this keyboard button. So when I push left 1, that would be plus sign. Left 2 might be the minus sign on my keyboard. Now if you map those keys in JMRI to a throttle key, you might be able to use that to control it with really no software development.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting thought.
Yeah, I'm not sure the professor agrees with us, but the thing is too is that these kids can use that joystick to do all sorts of crazy shit. I mean,
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You know, I
And
mean, us old people, we like the stands or the buttons or an X4 or something like that. But
yeah, I've seen this video that he mentions here from Ben Kingsley, and he's got a full function control stand, but he built it himself. It's not like he adapted an existing one. He built it. Like he built the notch mechanism and everything, and it's all tied into our Arduino. And it actually is pretty interesting. It's a good video to watch if that's something you're interested in.
And he's got a bunch of videos on it, and it's really amazing. And I would agree with the prof. I really don't like the idea of a game controller. And personally, I use Y-Throttle on a bunch of iPods, and I've got really used to it. And I think the responsiveness of it is better than what I used to get on an NCE power cab. Once you get used to its interface, I understand it does not have a tactile interface, and a lot of people like a knob, but I have pretty much got used to Y-Throttle, and I personally am in love with using it.
Yeah, I like using Engine Driver too. I've been buying $50 7-inch tablets to use as throttles, because that way it's easier to use, like the on-screen CTC panels from the JMRI web server than it is. And there's issues with Y-Throttle. You can use the web server screens, but switching back and forth, sometimes it just drops the locomotive control and it sends an e-stop to the locomotive. But it doesn't do that with Y-Throttle. I mean, on Engine Driver.
If you're really stuck on tactile too, the phones can have a tactile. You can usually use your volume button. If you have a volume buttons on the side of your phone, those can often be used, for increase or decrease throttle. So
yeah, there's no reason someone couldn't program like a version of Y-Throttle or something like it that does that.
So, well, they do right now, actually.
Oh, it does.
Engine Driver does.
Y-Throttle does not currently support it, even though Apple does support the use of those buttons. They've not integrated that code. And I can tell you why. There's a project out there that's kind of a best-kept secret, although there's a Facebook page dedicated to it and everything. It's a universal app, the same app for iOS devices, iPad, iPhone, and iPod, and for Android devices. That will be a JMRI throttle that's universal for all platforms. It has, so we're always arguing that Engine Driver has this and Y-Throttle has that, and there's differences in the two platforms. And Engine Driver does have more features. I just think Y-Throttle is a better direct throttle itself. As a throttle, it's a better throttle. But
the throttle piece for it works very well. So
very, yeah. But the universal interface is really going to be awesome.
Yeah, so Professor Glasser, he wants the IO board for
that thing's awesome.
Connect or a set of buttons and knob controls to a droid. Okay.
There's a couple of companies out there who have commercially made those products, and if you have to have it today, you can either use the IO boards or you can actually buy commercial throttles that have an Android touchscreen integrated with a physical throttle and knob. And
yeah. Now, the IO board, does that connect with the USB connection on the phone, or is it Bluetooth?
I think it's micro USB. I'm pretty sure it's micro USB.
Okay, all right, cool. Interesting.
That does sound interesting.
Custom built kind of thing. Again, kind of leaning toward hobbyist electronics guys. And
right.
And it's a nice concept. If you have to have it right now, though, there are some commercial alternatives. But if you wait a year, with LCC, I expect LCC to boom. I really expect that market to change.
Well, if they were smart about it, I think someone could get in there and pounce on it. You know, and it could be any one of the electronics vendors now. It could be a new vendor. You know, so it's possible. Hopefully, we'll see something next week. You know.
It could be us. All we need to do is get together in a side chat and figure out how to start a company and build a little throttle that an iPod would knock into.
Yeah, but we have to quit our day jobs, and we'll get some resistance over that score.
Yeah, I like getting paid, and my wife likes to eat. So
Yeah, so do I, buddy. So does Mike.
Yeah.
We like Applebee's, right, Mike? Not Applebee's. Red Robin.
Red Robin, yum, dude.
Yum. All right, so back to buses here. So we've talked about those basic kind of buses. Obviously, on any DCC layout, it's always the reason you want to separate them that we've roughly touched is traffic, and that was part of the concept behind going to LCC in the CAN bus, because when the DCC track bus was designed, they didn't plan on all these accessory decoders, sound engines, signaling, block detection. They didn't plan on all of that. So what happens is all that traffic clogs up the bus, and it makes command slow to respond, makes locomotive slow to respond, packets, because you got to think of it, it's like a computer network. So data is sent out in packets. Those packets can get lost.
And it's pretty low bandwidth, and something that people forget about DCC. We talk about DCC like it's the new great thing. It's 30 years old in its current digital incarnation. It's a pretty low bandwidth bus, and all the technology we've seen in Wi-Fi and networking has not been adapted to DCC. It's still a very slow protocol.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's really kind of, in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of pathetic. I mean, even with Ethernet, you know, we're up to 100 meg. Nobody has 10 meg Ethernet anymore. But yet there was like no kind of upgrade or bump up to DCC.
No, they've maintained, well, they did not design a good upgrade compatibility scheme into it, which is part of the design. They just built something, and if they wanted to do something else, like Rail Driver or one of those systems, then you have to go away from DCC to this other protocol to support that stuff.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, even the bidirectional communication with Railcom's kind of kludgy, because there's only like that small window where you can actually send packets back, you know, in the grand scheme of the protocol. And like you said, everything's pretty darn slow off the get-go, and there's, you know, it's like everything with bandwidth that we see. The more stuff you try to pump through, you know, bandwidth is like, you know, how big your pipe is. It's always going to get clogged up with how much throughput you put on it, you know.
And with the requirement here, the real problem here is that if we go away from the base DCC protocol, then we start having to use particular decoders in our locomotives. And what we all want to be able to maintain is lock sound and TCS and Tsunami decoders, and they have good sound and they work well and they're reliable, but they speak that very old DCC protocol. And
yeah, I don't see that changing.
No,
not for a long time, because that's where the development of LCC made this additional new bus definitely something worthwhile, because now everything but go faster, go slower, blow the horn, turn the lights on, turn the lights off, ring the bell, blow the whistle. That's the only thing that's going to be in the DCC bus now. So now it doesn't matter how narrow bandwidth that bus is. Everything else gets shuffled, all the real-time feedback, all gets shuffled over to the LCC bus. So all your block detection, now you can have a Railcom chip in an engine that can talk to a Railcom detector that's on the LCC bus that's got all this bandwidth. It can now talk back to JMRI and say, oh yeah, that's F73945 in that block. It'll know that. So it's much better because it's greater bandwidth. It's like, think about computer networks. and compare that to DCC bus. The DCC signal operates at a frequency of 8,000 hertz, 8 kilohertz. The bandwidth frequency on Ethernet, which is computer networking, is 350 megahertz.
Yep.
Much broader frequency bandwidth. LCC is like it's much bigger bandwidth, more room for traffic and all kinds of traffic.
Well, it's simpler. Part of the problem with DCC is that it has to handle locomotion. It has to handle advance to this speed step, this fast. It has a lot of variability in it. The benefit to LCC is that it's bonehead simple. Send out a signal that says, represent this, and then all the devices that care about that, whether that's a turnout, a signal head mast, an order board, whatever, can all respond to that one action. And part of the problem with DCC also is that it is a kind of one-to-one relationship. Throttle through all kinds of mechanisms to locomotive. And LCC, on the other hand, is a one-to-many or a many-to-many or a many-to-one relationship where many switches or many control mechanisms can control one thing, or one switch can control many things, and it's very, very simple. It's just about Twitter. You post something, and all kinds of people or all kinds of devices can see that you posted it. It is based on the Twitter protocol. It is a pub sub or a publish subscribe mechanism. The thing is that it's really simple because the DCC bus was never designed to control turnouts, and we put these very complicated decoders under our turnouts that have all of this engine mechanism basically built into the protocol, and they don't need it.
Right. Yeah. It's essentially a kludge.
It is.
We got that stuff in there.
Absolutely.
So what other kind of buses are there out there besides, your throttle bus and your actual DCC track bus?
Greyhound bus.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Hey, you want to talk about slow? That's the slowest there is. But
Yeah, really. So, basically you can break down your control buses into different uses. So you could have your accessory bus that controls just your turnouts, your power management, your signaling and stuff, and have that isolated away from the track bus by using something like LocoNet. But at the same time, those packets get sent out over the track bus. So that's where LCC, again, comes in. It isolates that traffic. It directs it over that bus.
and that lets us make things a lot simpler. This is true of any automation mechanism. An airplane, an aircraft,
Right.
747, a 777 has all kinds of different buses on it. They don't have a single bus that everything is on. They have a bunch of different buses that do one job and do that job well, and that's what we are finding will work better for our railroads and home automation and all kinds of things, is various buses that are segmented. So lighting control, for example, with Pricom lighting control boards, having a PriNet bus that controls your lighting, having that dedicated bus that does one job and does it well.
That's basically where LCC is headed. It's to have that. Well, they're there to be a universal bus, but like a CAN bus in an automobile takes all the data from all the sensors and feeds it into the CPU, and that's essentially what the LCC, the interface device will be.
But the difference is it only talks to the things that care about it. It's like
Right.
what Andy was describing. It sounds like multicasting. Basically, it sends out one packet, and whoever cares about it either answers with, deals with it, or does what has to be done.
Absolutely.
That packet will have the address to the device, and everybody's going, "Oh, don't need that packet. I need that one."
Yeah, instead of having to do the very complicated thing that we're doing now by using JMRI as a middleman, we can do most of the stuff with LCC and the right LCC hardware without having to have a computer running all the time. I still like having a computer with a screen and an interface to JMRI, and LCC supports that. However, you don't necessarily have to have it to have a sophisticated signal system and turnout control mechanism with LCC, because it can all be done in a hardware level and hardware function, because we've had to use a computer as a middleman to where we can send it a signal and it can say, okay, here's the turnout control, Here's the signal control. Here's the locomotion control. Here's the let's look at the sensor for occupancy detection and do something with it. The computer does the one-to-many translation. It's
Yeah.
the hub or the splitter in the communication mechanism.
So let's talk about the how you would put multiple buses on a single DCC setup. So let me go here and I will show something in JMRI real quickly here. Let me bring it up once it wakes up.
And a couple guys in the Q&A have mentioned stuff about wireless technologies, and one of the guys mentioned something about fiber.
Yes.
I don't expect us to see fiber technology on a railroad. It's not on a model railroad. It's not necessary. The bandwidth is not necessary. The cost of implementation is not necessary, and the whole world is heading toward wireless. I'm not really impressed with some of the wireless implementations, like the Bluetooth mechanism. It's great for a toy train, single iPod, single iPhone with a single locomotive on a circular track. That works pretty good. But trying to implement a model of a transportation system is pretty hard with Bluetooth right now. It's not really robust enough.
It doesn't scale. It won't scale.
Yep, doesn't scale, and it surely won't handle a big layout. What I'm fascinated with is Tam Valley's. What they've done is implemented a wireless mechanism to send the normal DCC stuff. So you have your normal decoder and you have your normal DCC system. It can be NCE or SPROG or whatever you want to use, and you buy a $50 or $60 transmitter and hook it to the track bus, and you can have wireless, and you can even use battery power if you want to, and it's very, very cost effective. Honestly, I'm pretty impressed with everything Duncan McCree does over at Tam Valley anyway.
Yeah, that's their dead rail system, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean to implement it, but without the dead rail component right away.
Oh, okay.
We're there, the battery charging. It's just the charging is the only problem. It's not the battery technology, it's charging the batteries that's so inconvenient. So what I'm doing is using his wireless transmission system and keep alive circuits so that I can be lazy with track cleaning and frog wiring, and use wireless so that I have a constant line of communication to the locomotive. It's very inexpensive.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you can do both. You can do the dead rail and have DCC signal to the rail. It just depends on how you hook up the locomotive. Whether you hook up the so the decoder gets the DCC signal to the track, or you just hook it up to like a battery or something.
Absolutely.
Where, you use the track itself just to power the battery when it's on live track.
And you can go buy a locomotive and stick it on the layout and run it, add the circuitry to it later. You're not, and you still use JMRI and nothing, no extra code had to be written to make it work. It just works now.
Now, that seems like a pretty cool solution, actually.
And I think wireless is really the future of everything model railroading from an electronics perspective. Wireless is the future of about everything.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a real good point. I mean, if you look at, like, say, the phone system even, right? If you look at the phone system in the U.S. and compare it to, say, a phone system in, like, Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, there are no landlines. Everything's cellular because it's so easy to implement the wireless. You just kind of turn it on and, it works.
Yeah, it's the era that things were implemented. We in the United States honestly suffer from a very slow and compared to other major industrialized nations, we have a pretty poor infrastructure because we deployed wired infrastructure, which is very expensive to maintain and very expensive to upgrade. Whereas Africa, for example, most parts of Africa went in with wireless because they were very late to the game. When they went in with wireless, it's very high bandwidth, it's very fast, it's going to be easy for them to upgrade going forward. We have the same thing with DCC. We have 30 years of legacy to deal with.
That's a good point, Andy. Well, let's take a real quick peek here in the JMRI preferences panel. Let me come here and then present to everyone. Select me. Okay, preferences. So if you see here, I have LocoNet connection built here. What I'm doing is I'm using the LocoNet simulator, which allows me to pretend I'm hooked to my Digitrax system. so that I can develop panels or whatever with this without having to drag all my hardware out and hook it up. We've talked about this before, that every type of connection you create has a connection prefix. In this case, L for LocoNet, and you can call this, you could say this is LocoNet signaling. Another one could be LocoNet power management. And they could be on separate communications ports, because if you go to, say, a PR3, you'll see it'll have a COM port. Now, I don't have one shown because I'm not plugged in, but a COM port would show up here, and then I could connect to it here. Then I can go here. Let's go back to the simulator. I can go here and then say, okay, let's say we'll go to Digitrax. That one's LocoNet simulator. This one I'll make PR3. Okay, we'll leave that like that. See, now that is a different connection prefix. So I could say, let's make that PR. Okay, and that would be, we'll leave that LocoNet too. Then I could go here and add another one in. And see, we'll do Digitrax again. This one will be a Loco Buffer 2. That's from a third-party company, RR Circuits, I think. This basically is a USB to LocoNet emulator. And then you can say that's, again, on a different COM port and give it its own connection prefix. Now I've got 3 distinct connections into JMRI that can all run simultaneously. And that way, typically you wouldn't do it to this level of complexity. There's really no need. You're going to have your track bus and a connection like LocoNet, unless you're, say, running NCE, because NCE doesn't have, like I said earlier, signaling. So what you would do here is say this one would actually be, let's go find it here, NCE, and it would be an NCE USB. Then again, you would pick the port, what version, what system you have. Note NCE has an N prefix. That's strictly the default. You can make that whatever you want. As you saw here, I made this one PR for the PR3. So what I would do, if the LocoNet wasn't there, I'd have my NCE, and here I could have LocoNet PR3 or one of these two, Loco Buffer or Loco Buffer 2. Those ones let you talk to LocoNet devices through JMRI. So I could send a switch command which would go out over that bus and then communicate to a decoder that's plugged into that LocoNet. So that way you can have signal controls in there that can be addressed from the computer here and run your connection to your layout track from this simultaneously. And this is very typical of NC users signal systems, that they would use more than likely that along with the NCE bus. This strictly is for throttles. Maybe if you're using, say, a switch it or something, you could use this too. But this is for all your signaling, all your block detection, etc. So this is all possible in JMRI as of now. It's been this way for a long time, but it's all under the connections here that you do it. So when you're in the Decoder Pro, just go to Edit Preferences, and it'll take you here. And then that's where you configure all these different connections. So does anybody have anything they would like to add to that?
Well, one thing is that you only have to deal with what you're dealing with here when you're setting it up. Ultimately, when you have a panel created, it can have something that talks to LocoNet, something that talks over your DCC. All that stuff can be integrated seamlessly. So you only see this when you're initially setting it up and building it out. But ultimately, JMRI abstracts all of that stuff so that once it's set up properly, however the communication gets to the signal or the turnout or whatever, JMRI abstracts it. You don't have to think about it once you've got it set up.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the immortal words of Ron Popeil, set it and forget it.
Yep.
Amen.
Well, now, I'm going to pick your brain for a second, Andy. If I have the NCE plugged in and I have a loco buffer for signaling everything, could I put like a DS64 on the LocoNet and send a switch command from my NCE throttle and have it go through JMRI to the LocoNet and control that DS64 with a regular switch command?
Well, my understanding is yes, and actually I think Chris had commented that he knew that worked, and he has an NCE system, and I think he was explaining that that did, in fact, work. So Chris might be able to chime in better than me.
Okay, yeah.
I guess, can you just rephrase the question one more time? I caught most of it, but I'm thinking I missed part of it because.
Okay, so we have our main system connection is NCE. And we decide all the signaling, everything, block detections, and turnout control is going to be on our LocoNet bus running off of a loco buffer or a PR3. So say I put a Digitrax DS64 to control some stall motors, right, like a tortoise. Could I send a switch command from my NCE throttle, have it communicate through JMRI over the LocoNet via the loco buffer and actually work one of those DS64s?
Well, I think what you'd have to do is actually kind of backdoor that. It's not gonna communicate directly because JMRI is sending out the appropriate signal for the command station that you have active. But what you could do is you could have JMRI respond to your NCE throttle, and then you could couple that same command to another command that would trigger JMRI to send that same command to your Digitrax system. If you know what I mean.
You use Logix to do that, so would you have to write Logic? Yeah,
maybe. That's that's the one thing. When you have a standalone LocoNet, there is no command station on it, for one thing.
Right.
If I plug a loco buffer or a PR3 into my computer via USB, I can plug whatever LocoNet accessories I want into them. They serve as a terminator on the LocoNet bus. So I don't need a Digitrax command station like a Zephyr or a DCS 200 or whatever. That, just the loco buffer or the PR3, form a standalone LocoNet, so there is no command station on there.
JMRI, the JMRI command that it's sending out emulates your.
Yeah, that would send it out emulating Digitrax, right.
And how your layout is going to dictate a lot of this stuff. And I say this when we're talking about track work or scenery or all kinds of things. Your layout, the differences and the uniqueness of your layout is going to dictate a lot about what you need. And that's why nobody can just have a standard wiring system. I, for example, use a dispatcher. So a LocoNet emulator hardware works great for me. A dispatcher is controlling all the turnouts anyway. It's not done from the throttle, so that works great for me. However, if wanting to do it from a throttle is pretty important to you, Digitrax will definitely be the easiest choice, no question about it. And I'm not a big Digitrax fan, but it's definitely the easiest solution if that's important.
Yeah, well, I mean, even if you're using NCE, you could just plan on using NCE compatible switch decoders or accessory decoders like the Switch It, Switch Cat, etc., and just plug them into your cab bus. Absolutely. And then use the Digitrax bus on the PR3 or loco buffer just for turnout. I mean, for signals and block detection. That way, none of that interacts with your throttle. But there, you could use Logix to say, if I throw this turnout, now that means signal X has to change aspect.
Absolutely.
That would be part of your how you configure JMRI with the Logix for controls to respond and control the signals.
And I think you'd want to do it that way. I think I thought there was a possible way to have that interaction happen between the throttle and LocoNet.
Just using buttons, just using your normal or switch lights, they call them. That if you just break that in pieces from JMRI, you can definitely send to your LocoNet and run your Digitrax compatible devices. So what you need to do is have a way to tell JMRI to go ahead and do that. So with your NCE throttle, you can have it, you know, send that command through your NCE connection, like Barry was just showing you, and have that trigger something that would then trigger the, you know, whether it's a turnout or whatever, would then trigger the JMRI to send the Digitrax command to the, you know, it's just an interface is all it is. So.
That's an extra step. It's a coupling of two actions, which once you get it set up wouldn't be a big deal, would have an insignificant amount of delay. It's a little bit of work setting it up, but it's not a significant amount.
No.
Right.
It's really, in that case, you're talking like macros almost.
Right. I mean, that's exactly right. And Andy brings up the most valid point is that there is no one-size-fits-all answer. There is no really easy answer. It's all dependent on your situation.
Exactly.
I mean, we talked, and when we did our signaling show, we talked about dummy signals that just change aspects based on a switch being thrown or something like that, and not part of a signal system per se, which is an option for someone running a model railroad who just wants the signals to change aspects, or like we do at Strasbourg, where they just indicate the switch position. That really doesn't really need a whole loco net or anything like that. It could be a mechanical device that's tied to the switch, and so when the switch gets thrown, it hits a little relay and boom, changes the light.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, Mike, like if you picked the appropriate assessor decoder that has outputs so that you could say if I throw it or close it, the outputs go high or low. You could use that to control a relay to turn a signal on and off. You could use that as an input to a signal control board, which froze you up. There we go.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Barry, I thought you froze there for a second.
It's really about, there's 2 points that I add to that. Is it's really how far, you've got to make some decisions. How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go?
Right.
Because man, you can. You could spend the next 5 years soldering circuit boards if you want to.
Oh yeah, it's like the guys that want to do a vertical climb up El Capitan in Yosemite.
Yeah, yep. And
Well,
the
it's
second
there.
point is the reason that we are, to everybody who's watching, the reason that we're covering all of these different systems is because there isn't a perfect system. If there was, we would just all get on board and say, do this. This is the right thing to do. But there's not. What a lot of people use Digitrax. Chris is using NCE, and I'm a complete fanboy of the Sprague. I really like it. It's simple. It's lightweight. So you've got to make some decisions based on your layout.
Like, if you want to control signals and everything via the Sprague is strictly a command station.
Yep.
It has no bus of its own. Unlike NCE, if people developed hardware for NCE's bus protocol, they could do everything that Digitrax has done. But you can't do that with the Sprague because the Sprague doesn't have, it has 2 wires to the track.
Yep.
So in that case, you have to use something like a PR3 or a local buffer USB. There's your only choice for use with a Sprague. But
Yep.
you can do the same thing that you would do with NCE, except now you're tied to a Y throttle because the Sprague, again, has no bus for a throttle.
Yep.
So you can't put a USB local buffer or a PR3 and then put a Digitrax throttle because there's no command station on that.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not currently possible. And I didn't initially buy a Sprague thinking that would be the end-all for me. I thought I'd use it on a programming track and that would be fine. I just ended up liking Y-throttle so well, and I'm going to go with the local buffer as I build my signal system out. And I like the segmentation. The Sprague handles locomotion, and the local buffer handles signal system, and they're isolated and they're easy to understand. They're easy for me to wrap my head around.
Yep.
Right. Exactly. And that goes back to your point, Andy, earlier, where you have one bus that does one thing and does it well, and then you have a centralized repository, centralized controller, where you can take one action in System A and translate it to System B.
Yeah, my goal is if I can hold out long enough to wait on LCC, or if LCC advances as fast as I'm hoping it will, then I will have a Sprague, which is a device the size of a pack of playing cards, that is the entirety of the control mechanism for my layout, and another device that's that size or smaller, and it handles the interface to signal system, and that's it. If that, that's all. Yep.
Yeah, I'm hoping for something good too to come out of LCC, and so we'll see. You know, we're definitely, me and Mike are definitely going to scout out to see what's there. We'll go beat up on Ken Cameron and see what he's got to say about it, and if he can point us down the rabbit hole to see who's starting to push some product. You know, we'll definitely report and see what's going on.
Yep.
So let's see what kind of questions we got coming up here. We already looked at this one about fiber optic buses from William Gorman.
Well, the prof mentions one problem with the wireless system from Tam Valley. It is mentioned about the TVD S-cab transmitter. There is a problem with the licensing for the use of the wireless spectrum that Tam Valley uses. The reason that not everybody is just using that thing is because it's not easy to package as a commercial product. The only way that Tam Valley can sell that wireless DCC, because that's what they call it, it's wireless, it takes the DCC bus and sends it wirelessly. The reason that they have to keep that as a hobbyist, as a kit and as a hobbyist thing, is because they cannot get the proper licensing to utilize that spectrum if it's a commercial product.
Do you know what frequency it runs on, Andy?
It's like 800 or 900 megahertz. It's in that, it's in that range, and it's not.
That's close to that's close to cell communications.
Right.
It's relatively low, and it's in a spectrum that's usable, but it's not commercially usable. It's hobbyist usable.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
He can't sell a commercial product that you just plug in and you're done. He can't do that. He has to sell you a kit. It has to be for hobbyists who are building stuff, and that's the reason that it's not viable. If you just want to buy and run it, if you're very ready to run, buy it, put it on the track kind of guy, this is not going to be a solution for you. But if you don't mind a little bit of basic soldering, it is a viable solution for wireless now. In a few years, I expect that commercial products to do the same thing will be out there.
Yeah.
Right. It all boils down to the FCC and how they want to play the rules. And the other thing too is when you get involved with that hobbyist thing too, it's not a strong transmitter.
Yep.
So it doesn't have a long range or anything like that. So you have to look in terms of, even if you use something like that out in your garden railroad, for example, it may not reach the whole. If you have a big backyard, it might not go everywhere.
Now, if I was in the garden, and someday when I build a house in years to come, I expect to do some O-scale 2-rail outdoor, I really want to do that. If I was doing that, I would absolutely buy into the one-to-one relationship of a throttle talking directly to a locomotive with batteries in it. If you're in G-scale, a radio transmitter and a receiver in the locomotive with batteries is perfect. But
it's so easy to do in that size of locomotive,
Well, and you're not building we build crazy complicated things in our HO scale layouts that just are not very viable on an outdoor G scale railroad.
Yeah.
Signal systems and automation and multi-unit lash up of locomotive, all this crazy stuff that is not viable and not reasonable on an outdoor railroad. So that's different. I'm just not a fan of the one-to-one. You take your iPod, pair it with your locomotive, and run your locomotive. Again, for the same reason that Mike mentioned, is that it doesn't scale. And it's fine for a garden railroad where you're running a couple trains and a couple people are doing that. But on my HO scale railroad, I may be running several trains at one time and with helpers and multiple locomotives and having other trains controlled by the automation that we're going to talk about sometime later.
Yeah, that's where like the Easy app from Bachman kind of lays down its side. It doesn't. I don't know that it has a way to do consists. Short of having local. It does.
Yeah, it does a consisting thing. They call it multi-loco or multi or something.
Oh, okay.
It does it. I would have to say that that RailPro has really mastered the people who make lock sound. ESU.
Yeah.
Their system has really mastered multi-locomotive lash-ups in that it does real-time speed matching. It reads the load on the engine and adjusts that in real time to make the locomotives run and pull at the most effective utilization, which basically speed matches locomotives. Whereas we have to jump through a lot of hoops because we have a one-way communication. And Chris done a show on speed matching that was exceptional. I mean, he really showed us how to do that in one of the best ways I've ever seen using the little speedometer. And
Right.
Yeah.
but we have to jump through a lot of hoops to make that same thing happen. And again, I think that the why we're doing that has a lot to do with the rate of innovation, not with the lack of technology. There's great ways to do this, but the technology is not innovating fast enough to give us all the answers today.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point to look at too, with speed matching and stuff like that too. Anytime you see a video, especially from a manufacturer, because I've done some performance testing at all, and I know for a fact that when I do performance testing, and what I show to the public is the best possible thing that can happen. So if I had like two similar locomotives, then I would do speed matching on those. Or, you know, two modern locomotives. I wouldn't do something crazy like, oh, I would take my 1969 AHM RS3 and my, you know, my
Broadway Limited.
Spectrum and my Broadway, and put all three of them together and see what happens.
That's tough.
But that would be the acid test. That would tell you.
And that's exactly what I do with my system. I've given clinics at NMRA conventions, and I'll take a Kato engine with a NCE decoder, and I'll take a Athearn Blue Box with a Digitrax decoder, and I'll take something else with a Tsunami, a Bowser or something, and you can get them all to run really good. It's just time consuming, that's all.
The only downside I would have to say to that at all is that when you start trying to put very mismatched locomotives is you have a least common denominator effect, where they're all going to run and have the slow speed performance only of the weakest locomotive.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the only caveat. And all this stuff is caveats. There's nothing we can go through with you guys on this stuff with DCC right now in its current incarnation that there will not be a trade-off. To everything, there is a trade-off.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and the AHM, you know, that doesn't have a slow speed. It has and fast.
Stop and go. Well, here, the professor says, prototypically, the real world doesn't try to speed match a GP7 and an SD90 Mac, let alone a Shea and an SD90 Mac. He has a point.
No, and one of the greatest benefits I have on my layout is I'm but predominantly steam-powered locomotive, and I do not speed match steam locomotives.
AKA predominantly Broadway Limited.
It is predominantly Broadway Limited. I am in love with those guys. And
trust me, I'm a Pensy guy.
Yeah.
Pensy steamers.
You better believe it. And man, they make a T1 that's to die for. I mean, it's right brass, and it runs better.
Oh, yeah. So here's a little question from Sean Hendricks, just a little off topic here, but what do y'all think about the Ring Pro or Ring Engineering Rail Pro system? They have a wireless decoder where they show that it's easier to speed match engines.
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit when I was talking about that and the ESU system. They have very similar capabilities. The only problem is it's completely proprietary, and you're going to be completely committed to everything with that system. You're going to put every decoder, every locomotive, et cetera, et cetera. And beyond cost, you're not going to be able to take your locomotives or your equipment, go stick it on somebody else's layout, and just expect that to work well. That's my problem. And while DCC is 30 years old, it has all kinds of problems, and I could complain about DCC for the rest of this show, but it's standard. Everybody
that's the thing.
Yeah,
right.
It works.
I have a friend who's running the Ring Pro, and in fact, he's a real one-to-one scale engineer and for his day job, but he absolutely loves it. I mean, his ring engineering, he's converted another guy in the area to that now recently, and he just absolutely loves it.
I get the appeal, and I really would like to have somebody who has actively used that system to come on here and explain and show it to us. And I've watched some videos from the crazy Russian guy about that system and the Roko Z21, and I'm very curious about some of these systems that are predominantly being used by European modelers. And I really think they are leaps and bounds ahead of us in so many ways. I mean, even in scenery and weathering techniques, they're really far ahead of us. But in control technologies, they have run off and left us with DCC. But I think LCC is going to level the playing ground again.
No, I think you're right.
Locomotives are so damn ugly.
And hold on there, Nelly. Only your diesels are ugly. Your steam locomotives are quick.
Yeah, I'm talking diesels here.
Yeah.
Diesel, diesel. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
some of the German steamers are absolute, especially I have a quite fondness for some of the German and some of the Aussie steamers.
Yeah.
I have kind of an affliction for those, a curiosity for those as well. But those guys are taking these very small layouts and running much more sophisticated electronics on them. But you have to
I guess
completely
the key word was small layouts.
yeah,
Yeah.
they've got a handful of locomotives, and the problem is we have a very first world problem here. Most of us modelers have way more locomotives than we want to tell our wives, let alone put all the
Well, and I was thinking that too, but when we were talking about the Garden Railroad, right? Because I can see, like you said, having actual controllers per locomotive. Because I think if I had a garden, I would only have 3 or 4 locomotives. Not the 300 or 400 that I have in my basement right now for each.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly, yeah.
That really changes the game. And that changes, and you can, there, again, this is why your layout is going to dictate what you do. I'm
Yes.
trying to build a fairly large layout that represents a fairly large piece, or a reasonably large piece of a transportation system. And with that, it has a lot of equipment. I need, again, need is a very relative term, but
Yeah.
I need around 20 locomotives. And around 300 coal hoppers plus a bunch of freight cars to actively emulate what I'm emulating. And if I had a small switching layout in Britain, I wouldn't do that at all. If I had a Garden Railroad, my roster wouldn't look like that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the one key thing that we've touched on, and I know Mike and I have covered this before when we talked about DCC systems and everything. The one key to all of this is, what are you doing with your layout?
Yep.
And once you've defined, okay, I want to do this type of layout, then I can say, okay, now I have that type of layout. I want to do signals. Okay, what do I need to do signals on that type of layout? Okay, so say I got just long mainline runs, very few sidings, very few yard areas. I have a much less complicated signaling system than some guy that's got like a lot of switching areas, 5 or 6 passing sidings, interchanges on a big layout. Now he's got a nightmare of a signaling system.
Yep.
So the choices in what you do, all of it develops what buses you need, what DCC system you need. Because, I mean, truth be told, the NCE is a really nice system. And if you're not getting into complicated signaling and everything, that's probably a really good system to buy compared to Digitrax.
I really like the NCE. Personally, I intended to buy NCE. And you can buy NCE, the loco buffer from RR Circuits. It is a great solution if you like the NCE system. And I would say, like I have said, it comes down to your layout, but it also comes down to your personality. Are you a rail fan or an operator? If you're a rail fan, you can make very, very different decisions about your layout. If you're trying to operate, and you're trying, and in that operation, you want the locomotives and the layout, the signal system, and the turnouts, et cetera, to represent the prototype. If you're trying to go that far down the rabbit hole, then how you do it is going to require you to make some difficult decisions and figure out the caveats.
I think the professor nailed it in the comments where he says the individual hero engineer in the U.S. I mean, that's so true, man.
What'd you say?
There. It's headspace and following the prototype issue. Eurotrains are far more scheduled, signal, and engineer does what he's told based. U.S. DCC is individual hero engineer focused, different missions and approaches. He's absolutely right. I mean, we tend to drive our trains like we are the engineer. That is our train. We're in control of it. The European modelers tend to look differently at it.
Well, they're running the layout instead of running the locomotive as a way to think about.
There you go. That's a good way.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the American modeler, right, we have hundreds of engines and hundreds of cars. Where in Europe, they'll concentrate on maybe 3 or 4 locomotives and maybe 50 or 60 cars.
And I buy into that philosophy to a point. I'm building a reasonably large layout. By European standards, I'm building a ridiculously large layout, but I'm very focused on the quality of everything, much like the Europeans are. Everything's very detailed. I'm not buying things quickly or getting a lot of equipment quickly because of getting that detail. And again, this is what are you trying to recreate? And don't people always do this, and I say this about scale, for example. People pick the scale and then pick what they're going to model. They say, okay, I'm going to do something at HO scale. Then, okay, I want to model the Norfolk Southern in 1980, or well, it wouldn't be 1980, it'd be 1984 or later. Or they want to model the Colorado Southern in 1932. And that's the reverse way to decide that. Same thing's true in DCC and how you're going to do this electronically. You've got to decide not what electronic system you're going to use and then how you're going to implement it, but what are you trying to model? What are you trying to recreate? And then what electronic system will get you there? If you're trying to do timetable and train order operations, that's going to make different considerations for your electronic requirements. If you're trying to do CTC, definitely going to make different considerations. Or if you have a small industrial switching layout where you just need a couple locomotives to be driven, that's going to make you have different decisions. So what I would tell anybody, and I do, is figure out what you want to model first. That's the interesting part anyway. What do you love about modeling? And then figure out what scale you want to model it in and era, etc. But also what electronics you need to get you there.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Andy.
The problem, Andy, is though the answer to that question is I love the variety. I love narrow gauge. I love modern mainline running. I love branch line. I love and it's the inability to make that decision and stick with stuff.
Yeah.
It's part of the reason why I have so many locomotives sitting downstairs in the basement.
A lot of people do that. And I used to. Years ago, when I sold the equipment off and moved to O-scale 2 rail a bunch of years ago, I had about 200 locomotives and 2,800 freight cars. But I had B&O and C&O and CSX and NS from all different eras. I will say something that makes my life easier from a modeling and decision making and an electronics perspective. It's as equally as important in an electronics decision as it is in a roster and locomotive and rolling stock perspective. Is that I've decided what I want to model first. I'm modeling the Norfolk Western in 1950. That makes it very easy for me. If you are not making that kind of decision, you're trying to run everything, it's going to be very hard for you to decide what you want to buy and what trade-offs, caveats, or pitfalls you're willing to put up with. And
you're absolutely right. I mean, that should be your first focus. And then as you develop that plan, other plans can develop from that. So
if you're an operator, definitely that's a decision I think you should make. And that doesn't mean you have to be a prototype modeler like I am. You don't have to go that far down the rabbit hole, but you should decide what's important to you. Are you modeling Class 1 mainline? Are you modeling narrow gauge? Blah, blah, blah. Make some generic decisions. Even if you're a totally freelance modeler, you can still make those decisions. If you're a rail fan and you just want to run whatever you want to run, that's fine. And it's going to make the decision easy for you too, because you can keep your electronics simple to allow for that diversity. So it may even be less of a decision about what you want to do as to what kind of personality are you. Are you a rail fan that likes to watch trains? Or are you a guy who really wants to recreate something from the past or from today?
Or operate, switch.
Absolutely.
Or just watch trains.
Here's a question from the professor for Andy. If you go all the way down the rabbit hole, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel?
That's tough. I really went all the way down the rabbit hole to the bottom of the rabbit hole. Anybody who's listened to me much or talked to me about it,
you've taken the tunnels off to the side of the bottom of the rabbit hole.
Well, here's the thing.
I'm a little nuts.
You can see the light at the end of the tunnel in the rabbit hole if you dig all the way to China.
There you go.
Just take a flashlight with you.
There you go.
You got to read a book on the way down.
Good answer.
So I do go really, really far. And take any of my suggestions with a grain of salt. I try to temper my opinions to where they're diverse. There is nothing wrong with being a rail fan who wants to run trains. Nothing at all wrong with that. And I am completely abhorrent to people who will tell you that's not the right thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
No, I have a problem with modelers that say, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
This is what I was taught. This is how I'm telling you to do it. There's no other way to do it. That is the biggest load of crap in our hobby.
Absolutely.
And like my American Flyer layout downstairs is a train layout.
Yep.
I'll argue with anyone to death that it's not a train layout. It is a toy train layout. It is for me to sit in my chair, watch the trains go around in circles, occasionally park one on the siding and pull another one out. That's it, but that's its purpose.
Yeah, if you
Now,
want
HO is different.
if you want to pull 89-foot auto racks with a Shay, go right ahead, and don't let anybody tell you can't.
Exactly.
You know?
No, and the problem is we forget sometimes. We start going down the rabbit hole and we get blinded by the darkness and we forget that this is entertainment. And if it starts to cease to be that, then take a break. Give yourself a week off and come back with a fresh set of eyes.
Well, this is what Bill Graham always says.
Smart
Don't
man.
forget that we are grown men playing with toys.
Yep.
We are not running locomotives. We are not in the yard switching trains and building a train that's going to carry $1 million of perishable food across country.
Yeah.
We are playing with toys.
And we are not making money for a railroad and running more efficient.
Our railroad is a money pit.
Yep.
How big and how deep of a money pit depends upon us.
Yep.
How far you go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah. So here's a question from Fred Cordini. All right, guys, I'm still operating in DC. I want to go DCC, but it seems the future is RC. See Chuck Baker, okay?
Yeah.
And James Wright with his phone operation system, which I'm assuming is the Blue Rail. Question is, why bother with it when in a couple of years it will be obsolete? That's the thing. I don't think DCC as a method of train control is going to be obsolete whatsoever.
No.
I think the other radio control is still a ways out for most anything below HO and below.
Yep.
You'll probably never see it in N scale. HO, there's some pieces of it.
And I think it still comes back to Mike made the most solid point about it. It's a scalability problem. Again, if you have 2 or 3 locomotives, Fred, then yes, it may be viable for you. It may be, but if you're trying to model a complicated layout with a lot of equipment, or you're going to take your equipment to somebody else's, really, and I hate to say that there's only one way to do it, but right now, in the current temperature of the environment, DCC is really the only way.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many guys so heavily invested in it. It's not going away soon. Like myself. I'm not just going to jump on the next bandwagon. I got, 30, 40 locomotives with decoders and sound, and I'm not throwing that away for something else.
Yeah, I mean that's very true. The investment piece is the whole key. I love S scale. I think I like the size better. My old eyes like it better.
I do too.
Scratch building aspect of it's really cool. But I'm so invested in HO. It's like there's no way I'm going to make a jump like that. And don't underestimate the cheapness of a model railroader.
That's right.
You are a cheap sucker, Mikey.
But it's inertia. The entire industry is headed in a certain direction. Everybody together, manufacturers, model railroaders, we're all headed in a direction. And I think wireless DCC has a future, but DCC as the protocol is going to be with us for another 20 years.
Well, that's the thing, is that it's not a bad protocol, and like Ring Pro uses DCC in its own form. The only one that uses the actual DCC protocol over the air is Tam Valley. Everybody else is using their proprietary protocol. So there again, we are back to if I buy Digitrax, I need a Digitrax decoder, which never existed, but that's what would happen. So you buy an RC system from Joe Blow's Train Shop, you're stuck with Joe Blow's, whatever he decides to create for decoders and sound. And that's the problem too, is now you've got to add extra electronics for the radio that's going to take away room for things like sound decoders and everything. So I don't think it's a radio bandwidth issue for control, but it's a physical footprint at this point.
Or do they stay in business? If you're committed to DCC, you can do all this stuff's compatible. You can buy it all, and if NCE goes out of business tomorrow, it's not going to impact you a lot. There's ways to get around the problem. Versus if you buy a Blue Rail and it doesn't actually work out, you're in trouble. You put a lot of money into something that's essentially dead. I have a lot of concern about being what's called vendor lock-in, getting locked in
Yeah.
a particular vendor. And I like that DCC is standardized. And I would love to have an option away from DCC for people, but right now there's not one that is not vendor lock-in.
Realistically, though, when you look at the sum total of what DCC does for our locomotives, what else could replace that? I mean, maybe radio, but why would we change the protocol that if we could just fit a radio transmitter on an existing DCC decoder and then have a radio transmitter and a DCC throttle?
Yep.
Why couldn't we just do that? That would be fine. And then our investment, maybe we can have a auxiliary receiver that plugs into the 8-pin plug and a regular decoder plugs into that. Then it could be worth it. But now each throttle almost has to become its own command station, and it talks to decoder X. So how do you juggle? I mean, there's possibilities it could be done, but I don't see the need for it per se when there's things like Y throttle, engine driver, the existing wireless infrastructure for NCE and Digitrax and ESU stuff. Why would we need to come up with a discrete radio control thing? Because it does make our layout wiring simpler. But then we're back to, okay, if I want to do it that way, what do I need to do signals and detection on my layout? I'm back to layout wiring. So that one piece, why do we need to get rid of that one piece? Well, we're going to need the rest anyway, unless everything goes wireless, which I don't see happening, because it becomes a communications problem with getting all the frequencies and everything approved.
When you hit the nail on the head, for me personally, the reason that I'm not going to battery is largely because I need occupancy detection anyway. And
so what's the point?
Yeah, and a current keeper does everything I need out of solving, giving me most of the benefits of battery power, and still let me do occupancy detection and block occupancy. In a battery world, how do you do that? Again, it doesn't scale very well. So if you have a complicated layout, battery power has issues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, getting philosophical on you guys. I mean, the reality is, it's up to the individual to decide what kind of technology they want on their layout. But the thing is, if you wait for the perfect technology that has all the answers and everything you want, one of two things are going to happen. Either you'll change your mind and move in a different direction, or you'll be too old to do modeling. So the reality is, you just got to pick something and stick with it.
And that's one thing I'm very happy that once the NMRA was given the lens standard for the protocol, this is the one true thing that the NMRA has done perfectly, and everybody abides by it. And the only thing that we've come up now with is the LCC thing, but that's to serve its own niche and to solve a problem with the existing DCC communications protocols, because as we've already discussed, the bus is jammed. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're driving down a very heavily trafficked highway. So LCC allows us to say, I want to take the best pieces, plug them into this, but I want Digitrax, or I want NCE, or I want ESU, but I like that guy's signaling system. I don't have to, because most signaling systems out there, unless they're proprietary, work on a LocoNet. So you're stuck with everything LocoNet right now for signaling.
Even if you use a Roku Z21 or one of those peculiar devices,
right,
switches, you can still use a Sprague or Digitrax or NCE for locomotion, and those things still collaborate and coordinate. And a lot of people like to condemn the NMRA, and I am not one of those people. I get that the NMRA has not kept up with technology as well as they should, but they have done an unbelievably great thing for the hobby for 100 years nearly. They create standards. All of our locomotives run on the same track. That was done 70 or 80 years ago, and all of our electronics talk to each other because they standardized DCC. NMRA is a great, great asset to us.
It is, but the downside is it's run by old men.
And they have been very slow to adapt. I'm pretty happy that Charlie's in there now, and maybe they'll adapt to the more, maybe they'll, realize the internet's not a fluke. But
Yes. Well, here's something I just noticed from Steve, Muskoka Steve. The NC bus can control turnouts and do block detection using VD20s and AIU01s. The
Yep.
only thing it requires LocalNet is to control the signal aspects, and that's true. I would really like to maybe get him on one of our shows, Mike. If Steve, if you're interested in coming to one of the hangouts, so we can discuss NCE and all these proclivities that it has here that some of us aren't aware of.
is that
and
a
how you-
feedback?
What's that?
Is that a feedback? Do those does
The AIU is a feedback system.
So
So
the
I would
VD20
love to learn more about that, Steve. So
Actually, I think the BD20 is. It's a little.
it's a block detector. It's a current detector. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a current detector.
Yeah. So Steve, if you're interested, please contact me because I would love to see maybe get you on one of the hangouts here. Maybe we can discuss all that components of NCE because we don't talk about it as much because frankly, everybody knows that there's lot more Digitrack stuff available out there in that world. But NCE is a real popular system. It's up there with Digitrack. So, we'd like to, show our fans a little bit more about it. So, contact me.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that. I'd really like.
Yeah, that I do. I've always wanted to learn what the heck the AIU is for and how to use it and stuff. Because who knows? What if I decide I want to switch to NCE?
Yeah, my concern has always been feedback. I've done it without feedback, and that's a real problem. And
Yeah, trust me, I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, and what people people may not understand that are listening is in the absence of feedback, when it turns a turnout from the direct through route to the diverging route, it needs to send that signal back to JMRI so it is reflective on the control panel that that's been switched.
Right.
And sometimes that's fine most of the time, but what happens if you change that turnout from the throttle or from another panel or from something else? Does JMRI get updated or not? That's been a problem. And
It does not.
Solves it. Right, it is a problem. Digitrack solves it, so I'd really like to hear about how NCE is solving that.
Yeah, I mean the thing too is like you said, when things go out of sync, you have to manually stop and sync up all the switches like we did on Strasbourg layout when we took it out.
It's such a pain.
But the problem is you get the junior engineers to sync the switches up and they look at it wrong. So you sync everything up, but it's still wrong.
And how do you sync a double slip or a single slip when no human could ever figure out what direction that thing's going anyway?
Well, the easiest way there would be to use, there's a set turnout script in JMRI that you can run manually anytime, and it sends close commands to all the turnouts, and then they'll all go to a closed position, and then it'll tell the panel that the close command was issued, so the panel will update.
And you can make that a startup item, so it does that when you first
Yeah, the thing is, you can run it manually by opening the script because, like Mike said, I told all the engineer teams that when you get to a turnout, call the tower. I will flip the turnout. Some of the younger guys, like Billy, who was 9, I get to the panel, I push the button. Oh, next time I get to the panel, tower, this is 90, set turnout 17. Thank you, 90. Turnout set. No, you didn't. Yeah, I did. No, last time you pushed the dang button. So, then I tell them what's it set to. Then what I'll do is toggle it in the panel and get it in the proper condition. Then we're back to normal. And then 10 minutes later, it happens again.
Yep.
So,
back to how do you want to operate your layout? If you want a dispatcher, then you have to fully commit to a certain way of operating.
Yeah, and certain kind of hardware. You need stuff that provides feedback. Like, I was trying to save money for the club, so when I bought the Tam Valley boards, I bought the Quad Pick instead of the Quad LN, which has LocalNet feedback.
Yeah,
That would have solved my problem. That's probably what I'm going to do now, is replace them all with Quad LNs.
In all fairness to you, Barry, though, it wasn't you being cheap. It was we researched it to a certain point, and we didn't put all the dots in order. We didn't think in terms of the feedback.
You got it out there. call the term my boss uses. It's not. It's Barry Rozier done, not Ed Mall done. Okay. Okay.
We'll give you a break. We'll just say that you bought those before the LN came out. So
There you go.
I can't, yeah, no, we could say
That's
that,
true.
but
We'll
it
stick
wasn't
with it.
true. They were just more not a good bit more money. They're about the price of a quad pick now. So
yeah, they're about the same price.
yeah, so I'll probably call Duncan and order some up before we go out again at
Yeah,
some point.
Duncan's pretty cool. He probably would, if you send the old ones back, he'd probably just change them out for you.
He might. I'll have to give him a call. Can't hurt to ask.
Yeah, he's awesome. If they
Yeah.
product, I buy it from them.
Yeah,
Period.
we were getting ready to go to a show, and I was in mid conversion a couple modules, and I called up Duncan and said, "Dude, I need these like tomorrow," and he got a box full of crap to me, and I got it all done. So yeah, he's definitely a great guy. So, well, gentlemen, it is now 11:37. I think we've wandered in and out of the rabbit hole and wandered down the path, but we've kind of talked about what we wanted to talk about in terms of JMRI and buses and what their purposes are, or porpoises. So I think we've kind of beat the horse to death tonight. So coming up soon on the JMRI Hangouts on the Tech Show here, because Mike and I and the gang will be doing all the JMRI stuff under the Tech Show, plus occasionally we'll take a break and do other tech topics for you. So we're going to be starting soon coming up on signaling. So the next couple sessions will be turnout control, and which we've covered a little bit, but we want to discuss the hardware for turnout control. So we'll discuss like the Tam Valley stuff, how to do tortoises, etc., and all those things. And then we will discuss, again, prototype signaling, where signals go, what they're used for, etc. Then we will discuss hardware needed to implement signaling to different levels, and then how do you set that all up in JMRI. So that's going to carry us through to the fall. So that's where we're headed at this point. So if anybody's interested in it, stay tuned. We're coming up with a lot more JMRI topics. We'll probably we're planning on working a demonstration layout plan up that we can build the signal system design to that, and then we can start doing Operations Pro in the fall, where we'll operate on the layout that we've designed and implement the signals in and everything. So at least that's what we're discussing at this point. So that way we have a fixed design that you can all follow, and this is the different elements on the design and why we put the signals here, and then how would you plan operations on that, and how would you implement that in JMRI. So we'll be involving Bill Baronic to help with the layout plan possibly, and developing an operations plan that we can implement the signaling and operations to go with. So I want to thank everybody for watching tonight, and thank all the friends on the panel here, Andy, Chris, and Mike. Thank you all for helping out here. And don't forget, everybody, if you want to get your great free model railroad resources, go to www.youtubemodelbuilders.com. Check out all the Hangout presentation schedules, download your free copy of the free eMag, and check out when the next live show is going to be, and subscribe for the eMag. That way,
it's a live show,
yep.
An after show ready for anybody that's watching this now live.
Oh yes, cool.
He's got us one ready.
So enjoy, folks. We will see you next month, and so stay tuned. Thanks for watching tonight. Take care.
Yep.
night.